I realize is that all of those aspects of Troy's case are actually far more emblematic of our justice system rather than outliers and how our justice system works. But of course, Troy Davis was not just a case and was not primarily a case. Troy Davis was a human being, and what happened to Troy had human impact not just on Troy himself, but on those who loved him. Martina always talked about her brother and said that they were twin souls, and she said she would say we have twin struggles and twin souls. And Kimberly is going to talk about her family's struggle, including what Martina meant by that, what Martina meant when she said she was fighting for her own life so that she could fight for Troy's life. Because more than anything else, what I've learned about capital punishment is the human impact that it has and the concentric, the ripple effects of that human impact on everyone who is touched by it. And so with that, I'd like to give the microphone to Kimberly Davis to talk about her family story from the time that Troy was arrested all the way up until what happened on September 21st, 2011, which Kim will tell you about, and the struggle that's continued since then. So, Kimberly.
I want to thank all of y'all for coming out and supporting us. Thank the sponsors for having us to this event. Like Jen said, with my brother's case, there was, just so much doubt in his case. And I can remember back in August of 1989 when the police actually, me and my family came home to a street that was just surrounded, which appeared to be like by the entire police force. There were helicopters, there were dogs, there were police officers on top of roofs, police officers in the grass of our neighbors' houses, in our houses, and in different things. And on that night, when my mother asked the officers, what were they doing, and they told her that they were looking for Troy Anthony Davis for shooting Officer McPhail. There was another gentleman that they talked about, which went to the police department, which was Sylvester Red Coles. Sylvester Red Coles actually grew up in a subdivision called the Democrat subdivision, and Troy actually knew Sylvester Coles because that's the subdivision that my aunt and her family actually grew up in. But with Sylvester Red Coles, at the age of 13 or 14 years old, he actually had a juvenile record and has been known to, carry a gun, sell drugs, rob people, and this all started when he was at the age of 13. Troy, Darrell Collins, Jeffrey Sapp, and also Sylvester Coles, they were actually at the Charlie Brown Pool Hall playing pool. And on the night that the officer had actually gotten shot, Sylvester Red Coles actually went to the police department later on with his attorney and actually implemented my brother as the person that shot Officer McPhail. Sylvester Red Coles did tell the police when he went to the police department that he had a .38 caliber pistol, but they not once asked him where his gun was, or not once asked him to produce his gun. When Sylvester Coles went into the police department, they just knew that they had a cop killer. Well, someone had said that there was a cop killer out on the street, and they had to get that person off the street. During that time in Savannah, it was just something out of action movie. Because you have police kicking in different doors around the community, police throwing any African American male that they see up against police cars, arresting them, frisking them, just trying to ask information about Troy or trying to see if they were actually Troy. When the police actually went into my mom's house and they, found, they got a picture of Troy, and that very next day, my brother's picture went, it went global in the city of Savannah, across the news, as labeled him as a cop killer, and they had a shoot to kill order out for my brother. When my brother was actually, convicted and put on death row, he maintained his innocence the entire time. And I was asked this morning, did we believe in my brother's innocence, or did we believe that my brother could have shot the police officer? me and my family always believed in my brother's innocence. My brother, he did not have a criminal record at all. You know, and with the other gentleman, like I said, Sylvester Red Coles, when he went into the police department and told them that my brother actually accused him of being the shooter, they not once, like I said, asked him to produce his weapon. They not once thought of him as being the suspect, as well as, you know, any of the other gentlemen that was there. For 17.5 years, me and my family, we went every Saturday to Georgia's death row. My nephew, Dejan, when he was actually, you know, when he was born, every weekend we was on Georgia's death row. And, you know, it was not a sad time for us because at least we were still able to communicate with my brother. We knew that we had to continue to fight, you know, to clear him. And like, you know, Jen said, you know, it was two twin souls, Martina and Troy, and we called her Tina, but they called themselves TNT. She said that, you know, they were dynamite, and, you know, she said that she was, you know, my brother's keeper, and she was actually my brother's keeper. While she was diagnosed with breast cancer when my nephew was actually at the age of 6 years old, my sister was actually given 6 months to live, but she actually surpassed it by 10.5 years. She said that, you know, she wanted to see nothing but my nephew graduate and my brother get off death row. When my mother actually passed, she passed in April 11th, 2011. And the day before my mother passed, my mother, that entire week before, she was out getting petitions signed. When she went to her doctor's office the day before, you know, the doctor, he actually took her off of a couple of her medications that she was on. She had an EKG. He gave her a clean bill of health and everything. And I can remember 3 weeks before we had gotten the final execution date that the U.S. Supreme Court in the 11th Circuit denied my brother's evidentiary hearing, denied giving him a new trial. You know, Warden Humphreys, he's actually the current warden at the prison. But I'm just going to back a little bit. Before Warden Humphreys, there was another warden at the prison that was there for 17.5 years. And this warden actually said that he believed in my brother's innocence, that he believed in his case. And he actually wrote a letter to the Georgia Parole Board and to the Georgia Supreme Court asking them not to execute my brother, to grant my brother a new trial. With Warden Humphreys, when Warden Humphreys was actually appointed warden of the prison in December of 2010, Troy said that when the first time he met Warden Humphreys came into the prison and came past his dorm, his cell, and told him, he said that, you know, your celebrity days are over. He said, I'm going to make your last days on earth and live in hell. Troy could not understand why would the new warden just get into the prison come in and say this, you know, say this to him. And it goes back, we actually, you know, with the Georgia Supreme Court, you know, they called to the execution. With the Georgia Parole Board, they called to the execution. We had the U.S. Supreme Court to halt the execution only to give my brother an evidentiary hearing. And the evidentiary hearing was actually brought back to the 11th Circuit, which was the same circuit that actually convicted my brother. Judge William Moore was actually the judge that sat on the 11th Circuit hearing. And when we went in, and Jen can attest, with the 11th Circuit hearing, it was almost like we were walking into a circus. You had the judge sitting up here, and then you had the prosecutor, the former prosecutor, you had the former police officers, the detectives, and it was just like when the detectives came in talking with the judge, you know, they were talking about playing golf, talking about, you know, church and different issues. But I mean, you know, it was just as if it was a circus, a joke to them. You had the 7 of the 9 witnesses that actually recanted their statements, and then we had new witnesses that actually came forward. One of the new witnesses actually came forward was actually the nephew of Sylvester Red Coles. And, you know, this man said he had nothing to gain by coming and testifying. He said because he could not stand by and watch an innocent man get killed. And he said that he knew his uncle Sylvester Red Coles had actually shot the police officer because he admitted it to him. And you know, it's just like doing the 11th Circuit hearing. You had the witnesses sitting outside the courtroom with the former police officers, with the former prosecutors, as if it was a deter tactic, as if it was a scare tactic for them. When we had witnesses coming up and talking about the case, talking about one young lady, Kiana, she was saying that Sylvester Coles actually came to her on more than one occasion and admitted to shooting the police officer. And she said that it was just something that was just bothering, you know, bothersome to her about him. She said, you know, he was just like, you know, just drinking himself, so that she can tell that it was something bothering him. But she said she heard firsthand when he came to her house and was saying that someone else was on serving time on death row for a crime that he committed. We, you know, and I'm sure, you know, like when, if a police officer stops you to give you a ticket or to write up anything, they have their little black books that they write their notes and stuff down, and then they go back to the police department and transcribe their notes. With the 9 witnesses that they had, when it was time for the evidentiary hearing, you had 9 witnesses. You were supposed to have 9 black books with notes. You were supposed to have 9 recorded statements from the witnesses, but there was only 1 tape that was in that box that was kept in the DA's office for over 20 years. It was only 1 tape when we came to the evidentiary hearing. And that tape was actually the testimony of one of the lead detectives, Detective Sweeney. And on that tape, there was one of the witnesses that said that Detective Sweeney told him, if you don't tell me what I need to know, if you don't tell me that Troy Davis shot the police officer, I'm going to throw you in jail and label you as a snitch. And you know what happens to snitches. And this gentleman, he testified on the stand in front of Judge Moore and told him exactly that. When it was time for Detective Sweeney to come to the stand to testify, Detective Sweeney, he said, you know, I can remember the 1970s and I can remember the 1990s, but he said, well, what do you call it? Earl Timers, I really can't remember, you know, too much of the 1980s. And when the attorney was actually interviewing Detective Sweeney and asked him, was that his tactic as to interviewing a witness, calling a witness a snitch and telling them that you're going to throw them in jail and label them as a snitch, and you know what happens to snitches? Detective Sweeney said, you know, no, that's not anything that I would do. So the lawyers presented Exhibit A. When they played that tape, Detective Sweeney stated his name, that he was an officer on the Savannah Police Force, and he said exactly those words to that witness. He said, if you don't tell me what I need to know, if you don't tell me that Troy Davis shot the police officer, I'm going to label you as a snitch and throw you in jail, and you know what happens to snitches. Clearly, he perjured himself on the stand, but Judge William Moore, it was just like that, just went in one ear and out the other. Judge Moore actually sat on the stand when the witnesses were coming up, and he sat on the stand with his eyes closed as if he was asleep, as if he had already came into that hearing with his mind closed, that he was not going to give my brother, you know, a new trial. Even with the witnesses that had recanted their statements when they came forward to tell exactly what happened when they were coerced by the police, when they were pressured by the police, with the new witnesses that came forward, you know, Judge Moore was cutting the witnesses off. You know, he was like, well, you know, he really didn't have time for this is hearsay. So we presented them with the evidence that they were looking for, but yet still Judge Moore said that it was not enough evidence to grant my brother a new trial. 3 weeks before we had gotten the decision back from the U.S. Supreme Court and the evidentiary hearing that they were not going to grant my brother a new trial, Warden Humphreys actually came to my brother and he told my brother, he said, you know, you're going to have another execution date coming up soon. Troy actually called my sister frantic. My sister called his attorneys, and his attorney said that, you know, this the Warden Humphreys just wants to use this as a deter tactic, you know, to make you scared, to get you aroused. Lo and behold, 3 weeks after the warden told my brother he was going to get an execution date, we had gotten notice from the U.S. Supreme Court that he was going to get an execution date. So it was all hand in hand, because if my brother's attorneys did not know that the U.S. Supreme Court and the 11th Circuit denied him a hearing, how in the world did Warden Humphreys not know? I mean, how did Warden Humphreys know? The day that my brother was actually executed, Warden Humphreys, he was talking to Benjamin Todd Jealous, the former president of the NAACP. He asked him, he said, "Do you know who I am?" Mr. Jealous said, "Yes." He said, "That you're the warden of the prison." He said, "No. Do you really know who I am?" And he asked him, he said, "Well, who are you?" He told him, he said, "I was a police officer on the streets of Savannah in 1989 when Officer McPhail had gotten killed." He said, "I was involved in the case." He said, "I was involved indirectly, not directly." And there was no way in the world that Warden Humphreys, if he was a police officer on the streets of Savannah in 1989, there was no way in the world that he should have even been at the prison where my brother was. When Warden Humphreys got to prison, like he told my brother that he was going to make his last days on earth a living hell, we used to have contact visits to where we would go in and we'd sit in a common area. We're able to, take pictures with my brother, hug my brother, like with my nephew, Dejan, that I'm talking about. Dejan actually learned how to play football in the visitation room of the prison. He learned how to make his first model airplanes out of the little Reese's cup, the little white packet in the Reese's cup. He learned how to make his, model airplanes with that. And, like I said, every single Saturday we were there because we knew that we needed to be there to continue to support my brother, because if we didn't believe in him, who else was going to believe in him? Who else was going to stand up to fight for his name, to fight for justice? But like I said, Judge Moore, he took away their contact visits. He told them that they would have to earn one contact visit every 6 months. He took away their commissary to whereas when we had their contact visits or visitation, we were able to buy them food out of the vending machines. They used to be able to crochet things. He used to crochet angels. He crocheted cross bookmarks. We have like tissue boxes, doll babies, all kinds of stuff, arts and crafts that they used to crochet. He didn't stop there. He actually put them on a 23-hour lockdown. They had 1 hour a day to either go out on a rec yard, make a 15-minute phone call, or take a shower. And, Warden Humphreys, he told my brother he was going to break him down, one way or the other. My brother, he still didn't let that deter him. He still didn't let that stop him. And, he continued. He was more inspirational, instrumental and inspirational in his case by, just looking through his case file, giving his lawyers different points. And, we had, by my brother being on Georgia's death row, you have the Georgia Resource Center. With the Georgia Resource Center, at first you had 13 attorneys that actually oversaw over 150 guys that were on Georgia's death row. Then 23 attorneys. Then the 23 came down to 13. Then the 13 attorneys came down to 3 attorneys that was actually representing over 150 guys on the death row. So you have 3 attorneys, and then you have interns that need to get paperwork filed at different times for different lawyers. With my brother's case, we were not actually fighting against his innocence or his guilt. We're actually fighting against prosecutorial misconduct and also paperwork not getting filed on time on behalf of maybe the Resource Center or, different habeas hearings. And, it went into effect with the Anti-Terrorism Act that actually, just backdated, but they didn't care whether my brother was innocent or guilty. They just knew when Sylvester Red Coles came into that prison back in August of 1989 and implemented my brother, they made a mistake by 1, not having Sylvester Coles as a suspect, 2, not asking Sylvester Coles to even present his weapon or even trying to look into where Sylvester Coles' weapon was. And they just took my brother's name and just ran with it. With the evidentiary hearing, the former district attorney, Spencer Lawton, he was in office with my brother's case for over 20 years. Spencer Lawton, when they first arrested my brother, they said that they found blood-stained shorts from my mother's washing machine. And they tried to charge my brother with 4 shootings. One of the shootings happened at the same exact time as Officer McPhail had gotten shot. So they just dismissed that shooting. You heard nothing about it. One of the other shootings actually happened in the neighborhood where we live. And you had you had 2 of the guys that came forward and actually told step by step as to what happened at that other shooting. They said that they shot up at the pool party and some of the shell casings spit back in the car, and it was a stolen car that they was in, and they put the shell casings in their pockets, and they lived in the Yamacraw neighborhood where Officer McPhail had gotten killed, and they say they walked through the neighborhood shaking the shell casings out of their pockets. So that's how they tried to say that the shell casings at Officer McPhail's shooting matched the shell casings at the Cloverdale shooting. But then when they found out that the other gentlemen stated that when they confessed of doing the shooting in Cloverdale, then they couldn't pin that shooting on my brother. But Spencer Lawton, like I said, for over 20 years, he sat on a ballistic report that was presented to the Georgia Supreme Court, the ballistic report that was actually presented to the Georgia Parole Board, that actually, and to the 11th Circuit, that showed that there was not enough DNA evidence on those shorts to say whether it was blood, sweat, or cleaning fluid. They presented the report that actually showed that the shell casings from Officer McPhail's shooting and the shell casings from the Cloverdale shooting were actually inconclusive, but yet still this is the main thing that the DA's office had to say that they were convicting my brother, but yet still Spencer Lawton, under his reign, you had 3 other gentlemen in Chatham County that were actually exonerated off of death row because of prosecutorial misconduct because of this same DA. No one ever looked into the prosecutorial misconduct underneath this district attorney, and it was just a joke. But with Sylvester Red Coles, his criminal background was actually just wiped clean. I can remember when we were at the Georgia Supreme Court, and we had actually gotten a phone call from one of the police officers. He called one of the detectives, and he told them that they had just arrested Sylvester Red Coles on a drug charge, gun possession charge, and driving under the influence. And he told them, he said, if y'all needed to talk to him, the time is now. They drove from Atlanta to Savannah, which is about 3.5 to 4 hours, but by the time they got to Savannah, to the police department, there was no Sylvester Red Coles even booked into the police department. If you look up his criminal record now, you can't find anything on him. And, you know, like I said, it was a long, hard struggle, but me and my family, we were a family that prayed together and we stayed together. And my mother said that if my brother was on death row, we were all on death row. My brother, he told us, he said that he didn't want us to come up there every weekend, even though we had been coming up there every weekend for 17.5 years. He told us, you know, that we had our life to live and we needed to go on. But, you know, he still didn't give up the fight. My sister, she fought because she had breast cancer. She fought not only to save, you know, trying to save her life and trying to save my brother's life, but the same medication that she was taking to save her life was what they was actually trying to give to my brother to end his life. You know, with the state of Georgia, with the Georgia Department of Corrections, January of 2011, there was an execution that was actually halted because a gentleman was going to be executed, and his attorneys had asked the Georgia Supreme Court to look into where the state of Georgia was actually buying their execution drugs. Found out that the state of Georgia was actually buying their execution drugs off the black market. But they halted that gentleman's execution for 3 weeks, only to go ahead and execute him. And the same week that they executed him, that's when the Georgia Supreme Court actually charged the Georgia Department of Corrections and said that they actually was buying the drugs off a black market. So you halted this gentleman's execution for 3 weeks, only to go ahead and execute him, and then within the same week to find out that the state of Georgia was executing inmates with expired drugs. They tried to say that the gentleman botched his execution. He actually sat on the gurney for over 8 hours. It took his heart over 8 hours to stop when he was executed with expired drugs. And that's just how, you know, the state of Georgia, they're just out for blood. With, you know, my brother, he told us, he said that, you know, we went through 3 execution, execution dates that he came forward that were halted, and on the 4th one, when they decided on executing him, each time we went to see my brother on the day that he was executed, he gave all of us a charge. And I can remember when we saw him on September 21st, he told us, he said, y'all have no reason to be sad. He said, there's no reason for you to be sad. He said, I want you to continue to hold your heads up. He said, I want you to continue to fight, continue to spread the word about the injustice in my case. And he told us, he said, maybe it was, He said, God's life was sacrificed so that we can have a better life. He said, maybe it was my time to have my life sacrificed so that the other men and women that are on death row can have a chance to have their cases overturned. And that was just something that was just so profound just to hear from my brother, because like he said, he told the warden, he said that, if y'all succeed, if the state of Georgia succeed in executing me, he said they would not take he said they would only take my body. He said they would not take my soul. He said because he gave his life over to God a long time ago. And if you would think about prosecutorial misconduct with paperwork not getting filed in the court system or at the right time, at the correct time, and like he said, it wasn't about his innocence or it wasn't about his guilt. It was just prosecutorial misconduct. The state of Georgia, the city of Savannah, Chatham County made a grave mistake by doing a shoot-to-kill order on my brother and just dragging my brother's name through the mud. And the only way that they could make sure that they went out in trouble was to try to keep my brother silent and try to execute my brother. And they did succeed in executing my brother. But he told us, he said that he didn't want us to stop with him because the fight didn't start with him. The fight was not going to end with him. And he wants us to continue to go out and spread the news about the injustice, not only in his case, but the injustice in other cases about prosecutorial misconduct. And, just want to thank Jen for, because when Jen came, in 2007, and like she said, when my mom passed, the doctors, they said that my mom died of, just natural causes. My sister said, what could be natural about a mother seeing her son going for a fourth execution? My sister, leading up to the time when we had, just before my brother's execution, before our last, hearing with the Georgia Parole Board, my sister's health had, started to decline. My sister, she had a chest tube that she was using. And my nephew, he said that, he was going to take care of his mom. And I think Dejan was at the age of like 16 years old. And Dejan, he was at the hospital, and they actually taught him how to drain my sister's chest tube. My sister actually got out of the hospital, I would want to say, it was just a couple of days before, or maybe like, I think 2 days before my brother was executed. She said that she had to be there. And when she was there, she was still fighting that entire time. She still continued to fight, even though my brother was executed. She said that there was still a job that she had to do. There was still a task that she was charged with. And Jen, she came, like the last couple of weeks that my sister was in the hospital. Jen was there with my sister, and my sister, she said that this was something that she had to do. And when my brother and my sister told me that they needed me to take up the mantle and continue to fight, continue to spread the word about his case, continue to stand up for justice, and that's what I'm doing. Continuing to spread the fight, continue to spread the word, continuing to fight, and continuing to stand up for justice, not only for Troy Anthony Davis, but for all those men and women that are out there that are incarcerated that don't have a voice. I will continue to be their voice as long as I have a voice.